All right, we're going to get things started. I hope everyone is doing well today. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Integrated Mosquito Management. My name is Chris Walker, Senior Program Analyst here at the National Environmental Health Association, and I will be your host today. To begin today's webinar, I will highlight a partnership between two organizations and provide a brief overview of each and what they do. Then I will introduce today's speaker, and in which he has an amazing presentation planned for you today. We will have a Q&A session following their presentation. And as we come to an end, we will provide a few final announcements on some upcoming opportunities. Allow me to cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be uploaded onto the NEHA Vectors and Pest Webinars page. You can also find recordings to previous webinars there as well. The web address is www.neha.org/vector-webinars. If you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, please use the Q&A box to submit your questions, and we will attend to them after the presentation. You can find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And at the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive a link to take part in an evaluation survey to provide feedback and comments on today's webinar. We ask that you take the time to let us know how we can continue to meet your needs as an organization. This webinar is brought to you through a collaboration between Gulf South Vector and the National Environmental Health Association through grant funding from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. Allow me to share some information about both organizations. The mission at the Gulf South Vector Educational Center for Training, Outreach, and Resources, or VECTOR for short, is to forge a robust, innovative, multidisciplinary, and cooperative regional network. They aim to provide innovative training and resources to professionals and pre-service students, creating a unified workforce that enhances regional capacity to monitor and respond to vector-borne disease threats. If you want to know more about this organization, you can scan the QR code on the screen or visit their webpage at vectoroutreach.org. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with NEHA, we support the environmental public health workforce. As an association, everything we do is to build, sustain, and empower environmental public health professionals so that they are equipped and prepared to protect the health and communities across the country. We support environmental public health by continuously providing the most up-to-date training, tools, and resources to the workforce who specialize in so many of the different fields considered in environmental public health. NEHA is focused on increasing knowledge and skills across all our fields to build upon our workforce capacity, efficiency, and effectiveness. We also offer credentials to certify the expertise of our workforce. In addition to our large online library of trainings, webinars, and available tools and resources, we also host an annual education conference, which includes multiple sessions focused on many different fields of environmental public health, such as policy and regulation, readiness, food safety, private wells, vectors, water quality, and climate change, and so many more. No matter where you are in your educational journey or professional career, NEHA has something for you. Check out our website to learn more at www.neha.org/membership. As I mentioned earlier, each year we host our annual education conference, and this year's will be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania from July 15th through the 18th. Registration is currently open, and we highly encourage you to attend. You can learn more and register at www.neha.org www.alexandros.org/AEC or scan the QR code on the slide. Now, allow me to introduce our speaker. Please welcome Alex. Alex Pavlakis is a graduate of Tulane University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Public Health and a Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. He has worked with the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board since 2019. As an entomologist, he currently manages field research projects, weekly arbovirus and mosquito surveillance, and mosquito abatement efforts for the parish. Alex, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Chris. Let me share my screen. And can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining. It's a privilege to be able to speak with you all today. And so today I'm going to be going over or giving an overview of integrated mosquito management and giving some examples of how we implement these core tenets in our parish to better control and understand mosquito populations. So before we can even get into integrated mosquito management, we have to understand what is integrated pest management. So one of our biggest challenges that we face is finding sustainable and environmentally friendly solutions for managing our ecosystem. And while we all know that pests are a nuisance, they can also be very important in health and safety and be a risk for those things. So by using IPM strategies, we can better help us grow food, eliminate pests entirely, reduce disease burdens that's safer for our communities, and more effective and more environmentally friendly and more cost-efficient ways. So overall, integrated pest management uses a combination of science-grounded and data-based approaches to control pests overall. So the core tenets of IPM, we're going to go over these ones one by one. So for the first two steps, it's going to be to identify that pest of concern and to be able to monitor that pest's activity. So we want to, and with that monitoring, we're collecting this data and we're using that data as a basis of action for our decisions. You need to develop comprehensive plans and thresholds of when to act. So this is setting your action thresholds. Once you've hit those action thresholds, you're going to be using those control decisions. And so that's many different ways to control these pests, including cultural and behavioral practices, using the least harmful approaches. And, we want to always make sure that we're using or we're trying to reduce the use of pesticides or chemical controls. And then finally, the last thing is the ability to evaluate that program. So seeing what is working, what the results are we actually controlling the pests with the controls that we are doing? So now that we understand what integrated pest management as a whole, integrated mosquito management is just a more specific set of pillars to control mosquitoes. So an integrated mosquito management system uses a combination of methods to control mosquitoes that are based on the understanding of the mosquito's biology, their behaviors, their life cycle, and the way that they spread parasites and viruses. So we have 6 core tenets of an integrated mosquito program. Our surveillance is going to be those identify and monitor steps of an IPM program. The use of chemical controls like larvicides and adulticides, as well as biological control, is going to be part of that control. Source reduction and public education is going to be part of those prevention core tenets. And then resistant testing is going to be part of that evaluation last step. So before we go into each one of these steps individually, just to give an overview for people that are not as intertwined with mosquitoes' life, to go over their life cycle. So to start, adult mosquitoes are going to lay their eggs in the water. All mosquito adults do this. Those eggs are going to hatch, and they're going to have these 4 developmental stages in the larval stage that we call instars 1 through 4. In this stage, this is where these larvae are feeding on bacteria and other organic matter that falls into that water, and they're growing and developing in these stages. Then develop into the pupal stage, and finally emerge as the only terrestrial stage in this life cycle as the adult mosquito that we all know and hate. So let's start off with our surveillance core tenet, right? So before we can even do surveillance, we need to know that there's a difference between a survey and surveillance. So a survey is going to be a one-time gathering of data for a specific purpose. So like a questionnaire, like after you had a customer service and a company sends it out to you, that's a one-time collection of data. Surveillance is going to be monitoring over time, so a continuous data collection. So you can think of it like things like hospital disease reporting or municipal water quality testing. So as a program here, we're building surveillance. We want to collect data continuously over time, not just one time in the year. So our surveillance program is the core function of any mosquito control program. And the primary goal with surveillance is to have an appropriate and timely response to that surveillance data so that you can prevent human and animal disease. If you are putting out traps this week and then you don't look at those results until a couple months from now, well, then that data is practically useless. So our goal here is to make sure that we have an appropriate and timely response to whatever data that we're collecting. And there's many things we can do with surveillance data, but I'm going to go over four kind of the major ones that we do. So with that surveillance data, we can monitor the spatial and temporal mosquito population dynamics and their relationships with virus transmission and disease incidence. We can also figure out where these mosquitoes are breeding, what are their primary habitats, and that can change throughout the year. Sometimes we've seen mosquitoes have a habitat that they primarily are in the beginning of a season and it changed over time. We can establish if our vector control measures are effective, if they're working, if we're seeing a reduction in these populations. And finally, we can find new and invasive species or extend the range of established species. And this is really important in figuring out, if we're worried about potential vectors of diseases that aren't endemic here, we want to know if these vectors establish themselves in our communities. And so that's something that we constantly do, especially after hurricanes and other major weather events that may blow in many mosquitoes into our area that might have not been there before. So how do we conduct adult surveillance? Well, we utilize several different traps. And these traps target specific life stages and also different species. So we have to use a multitude of traps to get a better idea of our mosquito populations. So on the bottom here, I have the ones that are host seeking in red and the one in blue as a gravage. And this is just talking about that specific life stage. So host seeking is talking about mosquitoes that are looking for a host to take that blood meal. So we all know that female mosquitoes, they are trying to get that blood so they can get the proteins for egg production, right? So these are mosquitoes that are actively looking for a host. And these traps utilize baits to target those mosquitoes to find them. Gravid traps is different. These are mosquitoes that have already taken that blood meal. They have developed those eggs and they are ready to lay those eggs. So these traps are targeting mosquitoes, and what they're good for is looking for mosquitoes that have already had that opportunity to take a blood meal. So they have the opportunity of picking up any arbovirus. So they're more likely to come back positive with an arbovirus of concern that we're looking for. And then there's many modifications of these traps that you can do to assist the performance and targeting of specific species. So one of the examples is for our BG Sentinel traps, we added utilizing dry ice as a bait. And that has drastically increased the amount of mosquitoes, but also increased the diversity of mosquitoes that we're capturing in those traps. So let's first talk about our gravid surveillance program. This is our arbovirus surveillance program, and this is run year-round with weekly collections. So one of the things we're really proud of is that over the years, we've continued to grow this program. And the reason why it's important to grow this program, like in 2016, we put out 19 traps weekly. Now in 2024, we've put out 46 traps weekly. And this gives us much better data, granulated data at specific areas of the city so we can understand where these mosquitoes are, where our positives are occurring, and where we can target our control efforts based off of having more trapping and having an understanding of these different population abundances throughout the city. So we place our traps in many different areas. We typically are utilizing city-owned lots or agencies, so fire stations and libraries and police stations, other lots that the city owns and hasn't built on yet. But in some areas, that's not there's not really a good city agency around there, especially in these kind of farther out areas. So we utilize private property with permission from citizens to do these long-term sites of trapping. And these traps are really good because they target Culex species, and they really are good at targeting our primary species of concern here, which is Culex quincofasciatus, because they are the primary vector of West Nile virus. But these traps are really good at targeting many different Culex species, and those species are captured, put into pools, and then we send them for weekly testing of arboviruses, including West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, and Eastern equine encephalitis. So what happens next, right? We're placing these at the beginning of the week. So we'll place our traps on Monday mornings. We'll then collect our traps on Tuesday mornings and identify all these mosquitoes to the species level when possible. Those species of concern are stored into species-specific vials, and they're taken to our state lab at LSU on Wednesdays. And then we'll receive those results from the arbovirus screenings on Friday afternoons. And so, as we talked about, what our primary goal here is an appropriate and timely response to that data we're collecting. Our control decisions are made immediately, based not only on the vector abundances, but also those results that we get on Friday. So we're really wanting to respond the day we get those results. And that's actually one of the things that we're working on here, is to reduce this lag time to be able to get our results a little bit faster than Friday, so we can respond to these mosquitoes that we capture on over Monday night, Tuesday morning, and have a better response. And so all of this is this core activity of our surveillance program here for mosquitoes. And to give an overview of what our kind of organizational or stakeholders that we work with, it's not a process that we do alone, right? So mosquito control districts all throughout the state are sending this information to the Arboviral Diagnostic Lab, and they're sharing that with federal and state agencies, public health agencies, veterinarians, and all that data is being sent back and forth so that we're able to best respond to our citizens. And so one of the tools that I want to highlight for anyone that doesn't know about it is VectorServe. So VectorServe is a web-based platform for data management and analysis used by vector control agencies and public health agencies in several US states. So it's not used nationwide yet, but Louisiana just joined in using the platform in 2023. And it's a really, really great tool to view statewide and really specific county or parish arbovirus activity for many different arboviruses, including West Nile virus, Western equine encephalitis, Eastern equine encephalitis, and so on. So if you haven't checked out that site, it's very, very amazing and have great public-facing maps. So not only do we do surveillance for arboviruses, but we also run these other routine surveillance programs, just because we want to understand these other species that are not targeted by our gravid traps. So we can use this to monitor for abundances of other mosquitoes, collect those mosquitoes to do resistance testing, and also look for other arboviruses that are not primarily spread by Culex mosquitoes. So one of the examples of this is, if you follow the news, the US had a local transmission of malaria in 4 states last year. So in Texas, Florida, Maryland, and Arkansas. And so, this was the first time in many, many years that malaria had local transmission. So we moved to be able to test our Anopheles species that we collect in our CEC light traps and sometimes in our BG Sentinel traps, and be able to test them for malaria so that we can understand those populations, which we wouldn't have been able to do with just our so we utilize to monitor for container breeders. We have 29 BG Sentinel 2 traps, which are the gold standard for collecting 80s species. So we have 29 locations around the city. And then for overall abundances and species diversity, we have 27 locations of CEC light traps around the parish. And then so we can also test these species for arboviruses that are locally transmitted here. And we do that sometimes. It just depends on what we're seeing and what's going on around our parish. So let's talk a little bit about action thresholds and what they are. So, just because there is a sighting of a pest doesn't mean that it's always enough to require action. So action thresholds provide a benchmark for when we should take action. So in terms of, for people that have agricultural pests, there's two terms that are two markers that people use. So there's EIL and ET. So EIL is economic injury level, and this is going to be the lowest population density of a pest that will cause economic damage. The economic threshold is going to be the density of pests that has reached a point where using a control or an intervention is justified. So this is going to be the most cost efficient point of intervention. And while this is really good in the agricultural sense, in public health or public health pests, they often require control at a lower abundance, right? There's not really a good marker of economic injury level for them. So setting an action threshold is critical to guide when we should go out and use any of our potential control or abatement tools. So some mosquito control entities choose metrics like MIR, which is going to be the minimum infection rate, or it's the number of vectors or they can also use, the number of vectors per trap per night. And so the MIR is going to be the number of positive pools over the total number of mosquitoes traps times 1,000. So the CDC has a benchmark to take emergency action of a ratio of 5 to 1,000. And then, like I said, some districts just choose or find a number that works for them in terms of the total number of a vector per trap per night that you might need to act in that area. And while these can be really good markers and something to utilize when you're making these decisions, they can be problematic for a few reasons, right? So with MIR, the problem is that the underlying assumption when you have a positive pool is that it counts as one individual. Right? It can't differentiate if you have 100 mosquitoes in the pool or 5 mosquitoes in the pool, how many of those individuals were positive. So in the cases of viruses with higher incidence like West Nile virus, you may be under assuming the number of positive pools that you had or positive mosquitoes you had. For vector abundance, there's a lot of environmental and epidemiological factors that have to be considered when you're looking at these numbers, right? Is 350 culex per trap per night, at the beginning of the season is very different than in peak season. So you got to think about what time of the year it is. What's the weather been going on? Has been a lot of wind, a lot of rain? Is there a lot of breeding around that site kind of artificially because of some breeding sites? And then, mosquito control districts have to determine their own action thresholds based on their local knowledge of their area and their district, the species of concern, the environment, and so on. So we think that a hierarchical decision-making process may work better than establishing just a specific one guide or one hit thing to make sure that we do actions. So for us, we utilize several different things to look at when we need to start thinking about using control methods for mosquitoes. So we can look at the percent change at specific traps compared to 3-year averages. We can visualize this on maps and see, is there a general trend in areas based off these traps? We also can look at, like we said before, these overall numbers of vectors. So here is an example of our data. In red is going to be our 2023 gravid data, and in blue is going to be the 5-year averages. And we can see, are we seeing peaks in our abundances or our average mosquitoes per trapping night compared to these 5-year averages or these normal trends that are going on? We could also use tools like disease risk calculators, which we've used now with VectorServe has a great platform for using these tools. And then we can also look at our historic data just to help us in general ideas for our program. So we can look at the total number of positive pools that we have and when they're occurring to help us make staffing decisions and increase awareness and know when to go. So as we look at our data here from 2013 to 2022, we can see a very distinct peak activity in the months from July to September. So we know we need to make sure that we have increased staffing at that time to make sure that we're spreading that word to the public and increasing awareness during these periods of time where these arboviruses are most active. And when we look at our historic data, again, you can also see that with these arboviruses, there's no kind of continuous trend in every year. We have outbreaks like years in 2012, 2018, and 2022 for West Nile virus positive pools. But then we have years like last year with 2 positive mosquito pools. And then when we look at the graph on the right with the same data, we can look and see that the human confirmed West Nile virus cases don't always match up with the number of positive pools detected. So we can't just use one as a indicator for another. So I talked about adult surveillance and what we do, but there's a lot. We can also do surveillance on the other life cycle stages for the mosquito. So with Aedes species, we utilize oviposition cups. So we can put either the seed germination paper or things like a paint stick, fill it with water, and these mosquitoes are going to lay their eggs singly on the sides of these containers or on the paint stick. And then we'll just remove those, dry it, and we can store those eggs. If we're storing them properly, we can store them for like 6 to 12 months on average. And if you see on the picture on the top right, that's a small little cup that we hide in foliage and other places, and these container breeders will find these and lay lots of eggs on them. When we talk about Culex species surveillance, they are going to be laying their eggs as rafts. So they're laying their eggs on rafts on the surface of the water. So we can put out things. So we have our Gravitrap here, but what we would do is take off the fan there and just keep a bucket of our fish emulsion and hay mixture that we use that's very stinky, but these Culex mosquitoes love it. And then we can go in there and just remove these egg rafts individually. What's important when we're doing Culex surveillance is you want to separate those egg rafts because you don't know which species laid them or if multiple species laid in that tub. So you want to separate the egg rafts as much as possible. What's different between Aedes and Culex is Culex will have a timed hatch. So they will hatch within 24 to 48 hours. But to identify these at the egg stage, you're going to really have to hatch them and raise them to identify what species that laid these eggs. And other species have different behaviors for their egg laying. I didn't go over it. Anopheles is kind of a mixture of both, which they lay their eggs singly on the surface of the water that have little floats. So different species of mosquitoes will enact little different behaviors in all of these life stages. But I just went over these two because they're the primary species of concern with the arboviruses that we have present. So we talked about, egg surveillance, but a really major part of our program that we realized, like we have a great adult surveillance program, but a majority of the mosquito life cycle is not happening terrestrially, but actually happening in the aquatic habitats. So we decided that we needed to make sure that we're also doing the same type of surveillance we do for adults for the larval stages. So what we identified are primary habitats that we find around the city, which is different from parish to parish or county to county or state to state. But we identified our 4 primary habitats that we have in Orleans Parish, which include infrastructure issues, swales, which are natural flooding, which is very common here in New Orleans and Louisiana, where we're below sea level, abandoned pools and fountains, and waste tires. And just to show kind of how extreme some of these sites can be, we have massive tire pile sites like these, which hold thousands and thousands of tires. So it's not just only one-off small containers, but these can be major breeding sites. And I also have a video here. This is of a infrastructure issue that was in front of somebody's house for 2 years. And you can see each one of these things squiggling around here. That's an individual mosquito larva. So while we can have a robust system to monitor the adult stages, if we don't target these larval stages, it doesn't matter what control efforts we do for the adults, these are going to continue to emerge and be in the population. So the breeding stages and these larval stages of the mosquito is extremely important to understand and to treat so that we can control these abundances of these vectors. So for our breeding site surveillance, we have specific data to collect for each site depending on the habitat. We started off very simply with pen and paper, going around the city and trying to understand what our problems are. And we've upgraded this program finally using software that allows us to easily follow up these previously inspected sites, and our inspectors can have all this information with them when they're in their vehicle out in the field. We find new points both through active and passive surveillance. So The active surveillance will be, we have one of our inspectors driving each street and looking for any potential breeding habitats. But passive surveillance occurs like through either citizens through run requests, when our inspectors are out in the field doing other projects and find them, and also our work with other agencies in our organization that have they report their issues to us, and they can let us know, oh, I think this may be a breeding issue, and so we can track and treat all of these very easily now with software. And right, this data is really important because it can give us an understanding of the specific breeding site issues and trends in specific geographic areas in our parish. So one area may deal more with abandoned pools and fountains. Another area may deal a lot with waste tires. So it really helps us tailor our control decision making in specific areas of the city. And then another great part of this is that with this data, we're able to report it to external agencies to get these sites permanently fixed. So instead of just band-aid solutions of continuous treatment, we can get these sites permanently fixed and really reduce the breeding that's occurring in these neighborhoods. So now let's talk a little bit about insecticides, or chemical controls, which include larvicides and adulticides. So why do we spray? Well, it's a fast, effective knockdown of adult vector populations. So we utilize ultra-low volume concentrations that are formulated for the insect's body size, and these control decisions can help break the disease cycle. So if we have arbovirus activity in our local populations, we can get out there and try to kill that population so that they're not continuing that life cycle of the disease. But with the use of adulticides, we obviously want to keep in mind to use the least environmentally impactful methods. So we want to minimize the use of chemicals so that we're not impacting non-target organisms. We have to follow really a strict decision-making process when we do spray. Only spray when needed. Obviously, we need to follow that label because the label is the law. We want to make sure that we are showing product stewardship. With larvicides, there's so many different larvicides on the market with various formulations and modes of action. So I'm not going to go over all different types of larvicides that we use, but kind of highlight a few that we do here. So surface oils, they're really great because they suffocate the larva and pupa in the water. And what's really important with this is in the pupal stage, they're not feeding. So a lot of these other larvicides are needing to be consumed by the mosquito larva to enact. Well, these are great because it can control the pupal stage where they're not doing any feeding. We also utilize BTI and BSPH. These are biorational larvicides that are from the soil bacteria, and they produce a toxin that only targets mosquitoes and flies. So again, when we're utilizing any chemical control, we want to be very mindful of the potential targets or non-target effects. So these are a lot, this kind of gives us a little bit more peace of mind than some other larvicides that can be on the market. But there's many, many more that are on the market, and the use of them depends on what kind of situation you're trying to treat, what mosquito species you're targeting. And we can apply these larvicides in many different ways. So on the top left, you can see one of our inspectors doing hand broadcasting of these chemicals, but you can also utilize backpacks and hand sprayers, or even do area-wide treatments with trucks, aircrafts, and drones. So now let's talk a little bit about source reduction. So this is something, so first we'll start off with home inspections. And so we offer this as a part of our 3-on-1 or our citizen service request solutions. We come and can inspect their homes with their permission, but we check the property for standing water. So mosquitoes, especially container breeders, can breed in very, very small amounts of water. So we can help them with turning over their containers, removing clutter, checking areas that they might not see, like storm drains and gutters, to flush them if they're needed, if they're clogged. We can dispose of bulky waste that holds water. So any of these things that are listed here, I can promise you if it's a container, if it has a divot, I've seen it in somebody's backyard and I've seen it breeding in someone's backyard, even the most small amounts of water. And we tell our citizens, right, once a week is sufficient, right? So the minimum time for an egg to go to an adult is going to be around 6 to 7 days in this peak amazing environmental conditions for these mosquitoes. So when they're taking out their garbage once a week or checking their mail, just doing that once a week is going to be perfectly fine to help them reduce the number of mosquitoes that they're seeing. And with these container breeders, they're typically weak flyers. So if you're able to reduce the number of mosquitoes that are generally in your area, you're going to be able to really reduce the number of mosquitoes you're seeing. And we always say, again, that source reduction should be done prior to applying an insecticide, because otherwise you're just wasting chemical and overusing chemical for no reason if you're going to reduce and turn it over. So while we do these citizen property checks, we also have program-wide efforts to permanently remove or do source reduction. So our primary breeding habitat that we do source reduction for is going to be waste tires. So this is a multi-agency effort that we do with the Department of Sanitation and the local health department. And there's many other stakeholders that are involved with removing tires in the Orleans Parish area. So this tire dumping can be occurring on public or private property, and that's why we use these other agencies, because it's difficult to navigate certain situations, whether it's on private property or public right-of-way. And when we're doing this, we have this decision between, should we remove these tires or do we need to do repeated treatments? What's most cost effective? Is it getting the staff to remove them permanently and get rid of the site, or is it easier to come back and retreat them? And how often do we need to retreat them? So what we do for tires is we're doing a mix of regular removals of smaller piles, which our staff can do with our limited equipment. We also conduct these larger tire sweeps, which we have an example of in the top left, where we have a full day or 2 days where we're going street by street and removing every tire pile that we see. And we also, report and prioritize tire piles that specifically are around residents or areas where we know are potential, like if we have cases of arboviruses from container breeders, we know that we need to make sure that we're reducing all potential containers in those areas. So we can work with these other agencies to make sure we prioritize these issues. And next, let's move to biological control. So these are really cool and important part of the integrated mosquito management programs. So biological controls is just utilizing natural enemies to control populations of unwanted organisms. The successes of utilizing biological control just depends on the system and depends on the environment that you're doing it. So it requires a lot of research within your own area to make sure that it's actually useful and effective. But this is a very important part of an integrated mosquito management framework, because it reduces the reliance of chemical control methods if used correctly. And so I have a few examples of just some successes here, and there's a link on the bottom here where you can check out many more successes of biological controls. But for example, there's the use of cardinal ladybird beetle, the Novius cardinalis, to control these scale species that wreak havoc on citrus crops in California. And they were able to eradicate these scale species within around 2 years. Another good example is utilizing these to control spider mites. They were able to reduce the chemical use up to 96%, which is really great. Like we want to make sure that we're reducing our reliance on chemical controls. And I have highlighted in blue here just an example of a mosquito biological control success story with Operation Blessing in Monteverde, Honduras, where they were controlling mosquito populations with applications of several biological control agents. And so they utilized this community education and participation and treated water sources on properties with turtles, fish, and copepods. And they were able to see a real reduction in the number of mosquitoes in the area. So we see that that these can be used and there's success stories, but why should we use biological controls for mosquitoes? Well, first, they have a broad diet and they can survive without the larva present. So they can stay in these habitats that we treat for long periods of time, even without mosquitoes present. They're also small and easy to manipulate. They can survive in a variety of different habitats, and they can tolerate wide temperature ranges. So they can overwinter or be there for long periods of time, and control mosquitoes over these wide temperature ranges. Also, another good thing about them is they reproduce very quickly, and so they can be very inexpensive to upkeep and have as a tool in your organization. And what's a great thing about them is their retreatment interval can be longer than many larvicides. So the residual treatment of a larvicide can be anywhere from like 30 days or 90 days. Well, I've had situations where I've treated a site like with it, for example, the mosquito fish, Gambusia affins, and they've lasted for over 2 years in an abandoned pool. So that makes it so I don't have to go back and retreat these areas with any chemical controls, which saves us money, saves us time. So they can be really amazing for mosquito control. And so, for example, I said, like, right, Gambusia affins we use in abandoned pools and large fountains. These copepods, which are these very, very small microscopic crustaceans, they are great at controlling, or they're very like easy dispersible and great, and they reproduce very, very quickly. And then Toxorhynchides species at the larval stage, they're eating other mosquitoes. So this is the cannibalistic mosquito. And they're great because as adults, they don't blood feed. So they're not a concern for nuisance biting. They're not concerned for spreading diseases. All they'd like to do is just eat other mosquito larvae. And so we can spread them anyways. We can either put their eggs into containers, or we can release them as adults, and they can find these cryptic, not seen containers and lay their eggs and control mosquito species that we don't see, like in tree holes or in bamboo shoots or other areas. So I just have a quick video to show like how these are predating on mosquito species. So on top are copepods. They exclusively feed on first instar and very small second instar larvae. And then our Toxorhynchides, they're going to feed on all stages of mosquito larvae, depending on their size. So let's now move to resistance testing. And this is such an important part of an integrated mosquito management program that many agencies haven't put a real importance in. So first, to understand, insecticide resistance is going to be the ability for an insect to survive an exposure to a standard lethal dose of an insecticide. So here's just a graphic in red boxes. These are going to be mosquitoes that are resistant to that insecticide treatment, and in white, they're going to be susceptible. And so you see the first treatment on the left. Then if you do another treatment again, these genes of resistance are passed on to the next generation. So there's more in the population that are resistant. And with subsequent treatments with these insecticides, you're finally going to end up with a population that is fully resistant to that insecticide. And then that tool or that chemical use is going to be useless in destroying or killing those populations. So insecticide resistance occurs in many different ways, right? If you misuse or overuse these insecticides, that contributes to resistance. So we always want to follow the label whenever we're using any chemical control. Also, if you just have the repeated use of the same insecticide over either short periods of time or even just longer periods of time. So if you use the same type or chemical class of an adulticide, you can that also contributes to resistance. So again, we say that you need to use multiple different strategies. Again, we want to rely less on adulticides and larvicides so that we can make sure that we're not causing resistance. And we also want to rotate those active ingredients of the chemical controls that we use to prevent resistance in our local populations. And so to monitor this in-house, the best way to do this is you can use CDC bottle bioassays, which are the standard to get the data on insecticide resistance. But in 2018, we were also able to gain the capacity and infrastructure for genetic testing. So now we can do various different insecticide resistance tests here in-house. So bottle bioassays, topical applications, KDR assays, and enzyme assays. So the first two are going to be looking for the susceptibility or expressed resistance in that population. And then KDR or knockdown resistance assays and enzyme assays will show us the mechanisms of resistance in that population. And finally, I want to leave off with public education. And this is so important. And everyone can help and must help control mosquitoes. And the reason is we cannot be everywhere. We can't be in every backyard. We can't visit every citizen every week. So we need the public's help to be able to control mosquitoes and help reduce these populations so we can prevent or reduce the risk of these arborviruses spreading. So educational efforts have shown and can reduce mosquitoes in the area around the public's home and in the neighborhood, and have them have better experience and not have as many instances of where they're getting bit. So these topics of this educational efforts include teaching them the knowledge of mosquitoes, their behaviors and mosquito-borne diseases, what is source reduction and how to do it. And this is something that we really invest heavily, especially when we do these in-house inspections, but also things like in-home prevention, utilizing screens and pest-proofing your home, and outdoor protection, utilizing, what's it called? Utilizing repellents and proper PPE and proper clothing to reduce the risk of getting bit. So just a few keys for education and outreach. The really important things: you need to understand your audience. You need to collect that information to better understand and target your audience. You can't just rely on everyone or thinking that every state or every parish is the same. Each area is going to have their own things of importance, own little quirks. So understanding your target audience is important. And then once you understand that, you need to target that messaging at each group. So multiple strategies are needed to be effective across different target audiences. What we teach to school-age children and students at college is going to be very different than what we teach pest specialists, which is very different than what we teach homeowners. So make sure that you're targeting these messages. And this is a really good example on the right of so one of our educational outreach materials, and we want to make that very specific to New Orleans, using shotgun style houses, including breeding habitats that we find here in New Orleans, rather than utilizing others' information that might not be important for or resonate with the New Orleans homeowner. Brand identity is really, really important. Keeping a consistent messaging and consistent color scale that helps citizens connect with your organization, trust you, build that trust, and continue to come back and learn from you. And what we always say is you should never miss an opportunity to share the importance of vector and pest management. So there's many different times when you can interact with people, and we want to utilize and take advantage of every single one of these situations. So when we're out doing inspections, we want to make sure that we're talking about source reduction. And if they're not home, we have door hangers that we can teach them and give them information about vector-borne diseases and about mosquitoes, how to do source reduction. We make lots of educational materials, and we want to distribute that in many different forms, because not every person is utilizing things like social media or going on a website. We also hold many different demonstration and outreach events, from anything from garden shows to things that are specifically targeted for children, so that we can get these different populations that might not come and find our information naturally. We also do recertifications for pest professionals. Again, we're not the only ones in our parish that conduct mosquito control. So we want to make sure that everybody, whether you're in the municipal mosquito control agency or you are a private pest control company, that you're utilizing the best practices so that we're not contributing to insect resistance. And then finally, having many different ways to give this outreach. So webinars, media interviews, press releases. Again, social media is something that we invested very heavily in so that we can target people that might not otherwise see our messaging. And then here's just an example of just many of the different events that we do. So it's never too early to start teaching pest control and mosquito control. So we have events targeted at children, and that helps us get into the homes of these parents and start have them thinking about what is a conducive mosquito breeding habitat. We also hold lots of outreach events and trainings, like the ones in the bottom left, which is our Mosquito Academy, teaching about resistance and how to identify mosquitoes to the species level. And so I've included here this QR code, and I'll show it on the next slide again. But if you have any, if you're wanting to learn more about the Gulf South vector and all the events that we hold and the potential trainings, or if you have a program and you're in the Gulf South and you want to get it certified, you can use this QR code here to scan it and get more information about our group. But with that, that's everything that I had today. I'm sorry if I went over with my time, but if there's any questions, I would love to answer them. And thank you guys again for your time.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex. We have a few questions that I'm going to read from the Q&A box. The first one, it appears you follow an IMM approach in New Orleans? Do you also conduct restaurant inspections? In other words, it appears you have a dedicated program. Many environmental health departments have so many other responsibilities. It seems impossible for them to conduct this type of program as described, uh, unless it's not housed within an environmental health department.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's kind of a two-parter. So I guess in mosquito, um, within the mosquito realm, we do respond to citizen requests, so that it can include these private properties. And so restaurants have called if they have like an increase. What we do is, monitor the areas around that caller's request, and figure out what's going on there. Is there breeding habitats nearby? What's the mosquito of concern? What's their flight range? All these aspects to help us target our control decisions. I know our rodent control does a lot of rodent inspections. That's probably more in that, restaurant um, sort of question. But what I guess for the second part of your question, really, you don't have to do it all at once. I think the really important thing is getting that data and understanding the situation at hand. So surveillance is key, and that can be that first step. Investing in a biological control program is costly and it's a very big barrier or a blockade for a lot of organizations, because you need certain people that know how to raise these things. So I would say that there's always a way to do something. And again, you can do, start off with 2 traps or 3 traps rather than, 46 like we had. You had to build that program. We didn't start overnight doing all these core tenants. You have to slowly build into that type of a program.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. There is a question, since your partner is the Gulf Group, how closely are you and them watching the northern spread of dengue?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's something really important. So if for people that don't know, right, South and Central America have had an epidemic and a real large outbreak of dengue, and last year was record highs, and this year at the start has been even more. So it's something that's definitely on our radar here within our specific agency, and as a Gulf South Vector group, we are currently updating and creating like plans of action that can be then like looked at and utilized by other agencies, especially smaller agencies, to help build their response to a dengue outbreak or potential dengue outbreak. And then within house, we're gearing up to try to be able to do a lot of in-house testing. We're collecting Aedes species, which are the primary vectors for dengue, and we're want to understand first off our resistance. So if we were to go out and needing to spray, what is our localized resistance in each one of these zones or areas of the city, and then also to be able to test these mosquitoes for the presence of these arboviruses, so that we can make sure, because if you don't test for it, you're never going to have you'll only have these human positive cases, and that's a little late. So we want to make sure that if we want to monitor our mosquitoes in there, so we can see, are we finding any in the local population with dengue.
thank you for that, Alex. Let's see, what type of surveillance and management activities do you have at your points of entry, such as ports and airports in New Orleans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that goes really good along the last question of dengue. That's something that we are thinking about adding a little bit more surveillance around the ports of entry. We do have these regular traps that go out, and the goal is to have this historic data to base a lot of decisions off of. But we're continuously adding to our amount of sites, and hopefully we'll continue to build so that we have especially like a good reading of what's not only at these ports of entry, but also on the barriers or borders of our parish, and see what's coming in, what's potentially moving over. So that is something that we are looking at, especially with the potential for dengue, to kind of do some more trapping, or utilizing a few more traps to make sure that we are really collecting as many species of concern in that area.
Okay.
It's a really good question, though.
All right, and this will probably be our last question. How does the use of surface oils impact non-target species?
Yeah, definitely. That's that's a concern when using surface oil. So it's again not something that we want to just use whenever. Um, it does create this oil barrier, and it will definitely can kill non-target organisms that are in that water and suffocate them as well. So again, that's part of that environmentally uh, or being environmentally conscious when using any of the larvicides we use. So it depends on where that is. Is that water problem leaking into a storm drain? Okay, then you don't want to use a certain chemical or larvicide. Are there the potential for kids to be playing in that water or things like that? Are all things that we think about before we take any action. The real good use, or why we end up using surface oils, is because they're the most effective way to control that people stage. So if we treat it with other larvicides like a BTI or BSPH, you're those people will emerge and they will become adult mosquitoes. So you will not kill them. So it's kind of a mixture of like, when is there a lot of PIPA in that water? Is there not? Can we use something else? Are there other organisms in that water? How should we treat it best? But each case is a one-off or one-by-one decision. It's not we don't have a set ground rule of like, okay, when it's this type, do this. It's for our inspector in the field to really make those decisions and look at all the context clues before they just throw a chemical in there.
Thank you for that, Alex. We're now going to end things. We want to thank Alex for his presentation and also for answering questions. We also want to remind attendees of the other topics we will cover in this series. 2 weeks from now, we will have a presentation on integrated rodent management. And about 30 days from now, we will conclude the series with mosquito and rodent control preparedness. So make sure you register and block your calendars for some interesting topics in vectors and pest control. We encourage you to complete the Gulf South Vector survey. This survey will be helpful for the development of training materials. Certain questions you may see, how do people want to learn? Through hands-on podcasts, webinars, virtually, in person. And also, what are the barriers to learning? So we encourage you to capture the QR code. The survey will take about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. And this will be greatly appreciated from the Gulf South Vector as they work towards trying to develop resources specifically tailored to those who have a voice, and so make your voices heard. We definitely encourage that. Lastly, I invite you to join us as a national NEHA member, an international NEHA member. There's no other organization in the world doing what we're doing to support the environmental public health workforce. The more members we have, the stronger our voice is at the national and international level for policy and funding. And the more aligned we are in best practices across the world, that's a stronger fit for us collectively, for boots on the ground and those who are doing the work. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed. Please, you'll have a survey that comes up. Please let us know how we're doing and how we can continue to meet your needs. So thank you, Alex. Thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your day.